Napoleon's invasion of Russia, 1812. Let's start with one of the most infamous blunders in military history. In 1812, Napoleon Bonaparte was at the peak of his power. He had conquered most of Europe, and his next goal was to force Russia back into his economic alliance. Confident and overambitious, he invaded Russia with an army of over 600,000 soldiers, the largest Europe had ever seen. But what Napoleon didn't plan for was Russia's brutal winter and their scorched earth strategy. As his army advanced, the Russians retreated while burning crops, homes, and supplies, leaving the French army with nothing to eat or shelter in. When winter hit, temperatures dropped below -30 degrees Celsius. Soldiers froze, starved, and deserted in droves. By the time Napoleon's army limped back to France, fewer than 100,000 men remained. One of the greatest generals in history had been undone not by battle, but by bad planning and the weather. Hitler's invasion of the Soviet Union, Operation Barbarossa, 1941. You'd think someone would have learned from Napoleon's mistake, but over a century later, Hitler repeated almost the same one. In 1941, Germany invaded the Soviet Union under Operation Barbarossa, believing it would be a quick victory. Hitler thought the Red Army was weak and that the Soviet people would welcome liberation from Stalin. He was wrong on both counts. Germany advanced quickly at first, but as they pushed deeper into Soviet territory, their supply lines stretched thin. Then came the infamous Russian winter. German troops lacked proper clothing, food, and fuel. Tanks froze, weapons jammed, and morale collapsed. By early 1943, after the Battle of Stalingrad, the entire German Sixth Army was wiped out, over 300,000 men gone. Operation Barbarossa turned out to be one of the costliest military mistakes ever made and marked the beginning of Nazi Germany's downfall. The Charge of the Light Brigade, 1854. Sometimes the dumbest decisions happen in seconds. During the Crimean War, British forces fought against Russia. In October 1854, British commanders ordered the Light Brigade, a cavalry unit armed with sabers, not rifles, to attack a heavily fortified Russian artillery position. The problem? A miscommunication. The order was misunderstood, and instead of attacking a vulnerable supply column, the cavalry charged straight into a valley lined with Russian cannons. The result was catastrophic. Out of about 600 soldiers, nearly half were killed or wounded in just minutes. Alfred, Lord Tennyson, later immortalized it in his poem, "Theirs not to reason why, theirs but to do and die." It's a tragic example of how one unclear command can turn bravery into suicide. The Maginot Line, 1930s-1940. Before World War II, France decided to prevent another German invasion by building an enormous line of fortresses, bunkers, and tunnels along its eastern border. This was the Maginot Line, an engineering marvel meant to be impenetrable. There was just one small problem: it didn't cover the Belgian border. When Germany invaded in 1940, they simply went around the Maginot Line through Belgium, exactly where France had assumed they wouldn't. Billions of francs, years of construction, and a nation's false sense of security all collapsed in days. The Maginot Line became a global symbol of misplaced confidence and outdated strategy. The Bay of Pigs invasion, 1961. In 1961, the United States launched one of its most embarrassing military operations, the Bay of Pigs invasion in Cuba. The plan was to use Cuban exiles, trained by the CIA, to overthrow Fidel Castro's communist government. The U.S. believed the invasion would inspire a local uprising. It didn't. The invasion force landed, was quickly surrounded and captured. U.S. air support was withdrawn at the last minute, leaving the rebels helpless. Within 3 days, the entire mission failed, and America's role was exposed to the world. Instead of toppling Castro, the operation pushed Cuba closer to the Soviet Union, directly leading to the Cuban Missile Crisis a year later. The Dardanelles Campaign, 1915. During World War I, the Allies wanted to open a new front against the Ottoman Empire by capturing the Dardanelles Strait, a key waterway leading to Constantinople, now Istanbul. The idea, pushed by Winston Churchill, then First Lord of the Admiralty, was to use naval power to break through the Turkish defenses. It sounded good on paper, but in execution it was a disaster. The Allied fleet ran into mines, gunfire, and strong resistance. When a land invasion followed, the troops faced steep cliffs, scorching heat, and entrenched Ottoman soldiers. After 8 months of fighting, over 250,000 Allied troops were killed or wounded, and the campaign was abandoned. The failure nearly ended Churchill's political career and showed how arrogance and underestimation of the enemy can doom even the best-laid plans. The Battle of Little Bighorn, 1876. Sometimes ego is deadlier than the enemy. In 1876, U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer led his 7th Cavalry against a coalition of Lakota Sioux and Cheyenne warriors in Montana. Custer believed he was facing a small group and divided his men into smaller detachments for a surprise attack. But the Native American forces, led by Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, numbered over 2,000, far more than Custer expected. Surrounded and outnumbered, Custer and his 210 men were wiped out in what became known as Custer's Last Stand. It remains one of the most famous examples of overconfidence leading to total annihilation. Japan attacking Pearl Harbor, 1941. At first glance, Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor might seem like a tactical success. It crippled the U.S. Pacific Fleet, but strategically it was one of the dumbest moves in modern history. By attacking the U.S. without a formal declaration of war, Japan turned American public opinion overnight from isolationism to all-out revenge. Within 4 years, Japan faced atomic bombings, total defeat, and occupation. Japan's leaders hoped to force the U.S. into negotiation. Instead, they unleashed a superpower determined to win at any cost. The Battle of Gallipoli, another look at overconfidence. While technically part of the Dardanelles campaign, Gallipoli deserves its own mention because of how deeply flawed it was. The Allies underestimated the Ottomans' defenses and thought sheer naval power would be enough. Troops landed on beaches surrounded by cliffs and open terrain, becoming easy targets. Months of bloodshed followed with little progress. In the end, over 500,000 casualties were recorded on both sides and nothing was gained. Gallipoli remains a painful reminder that even the smartest commanders can underestimate the will of their enemy. The U.S. invasion of Iraq, 2003. The invasion of Iraq in 2003 is one of the most debated modern military decisions and widely regarded as one of the most short-sighted. The U.S. justified the invasion by claiming Iraq possessed weapons of mass destruction, which were never found. The initial invasion toppled Saddam Hussein quickly, but the aftermath was chaos. With no clear plan for rebuilding, Iraq descended into civil war, giving rise to insurgent groups and later ISIS. The war cost trillions of dollars, destabilized the Middle East, and damaged America's global credibility. It's a modern example of how a lack of post-war strategy can turn a military victory into a long-term disaster. The fall of Singapore, 1942. During World War II, Singapore was considered the Gibraltar of the East, an unbeatable British fortress. But Britain had made a critical assumption. Any attack would come from the sea, so all the heavy guns faced the ocean. In 1942, Japan attacked from the land, through the jungles of Malaya. British forces were completely unprepared. Within a week, Singapore fell, and over 80,000 British and Commonwealth troops surrendered. Winston Churchill called it the worst disaster and largest capitulation in British history. It was a humiliating defeat caused by rigid thinking and poor adaptation.